Hello, everybody. My name is Robert King, and I want to talk about the basic core concepts of project management. What we're going to talk about are the 5 process groups, the 10 knowledge areas, and then the 2 main schools of thought, which are predictive and agile methods of managing a project. So, just to begin, let's talk about the 5 process groups. The 5 process groups are the following: you initiate, you plan, you execute, you monitor and control, and then you close the project. And so, what does this look like? When you initiate the project, you authorize and you define the aspects of your project. You're looking for the permission to do it, whether you've been contracted by a group. You look for the definition of what the project hopes to accomplish and achieve, the business needs of the organization. When you plan a project, this is your course of action. This is where we start talking about things such as scope, cost, schedule, the triad of management, which we'll talk in more detail. And then when we execute, we follow the plan. When you're executing a project, what you don't want to do is take the time planning and then not actually implementing that plan into your stages of doing. For example, if you make a risk response plan, for example, for safety concerns, you want to make sure that people are following the actual risk safety concerns and implementing the risk response plan. And then when we get into monitor control, the big concept for this, just for the basics, is that we are tracking our performance. We have defined performance measures. We have performance data that we're able to receive and then convert and create into reports to see if are we meeting our requirements, are we growing to our requirements, or are we ahead of our requirements? And then finally, we close our project, which is the formal completion. So think about things such as signed contracts, accounts being closed, customer agreements finalized. This is where you have written statements saying that the project has been formally completed so that no one for any legal reason can come back and add on to or say that something wasn't done in the correct way. And so when we have our process groups, this is the way of understanding or thinking of a project traditionally. But what we also have are 10 knowledge areas that help us in the flexibilities of a project and get into the finer details. And let's talk about them here. We have integration, risk management, scope, cost, schedule management. We have resource management, procurement management, communication and stakeholder management, and then we have quality management. Now, when we put all of these together, what we're thinking of is a way of interacting with our stakeholders and with our organization, the project. Here, let's talk about it. Integration management. This is where we start pulling all of our documents together. This is where we say, how are we going to engage stakeholders and how this applies to communication, how it also applies to our scope, cost, and schedule. It is pulling everything that we have together and making sure that all of the gears are spinning. When we have risk management, risks are not just bad things. There can be threats and there can also be opportunities. So when we think about risk management, what we're trying to do is reduce our threats as often as possible and maximize our opportunities as often as possible. Think about a threat being things that can hurt the project, can limit the project, or think of things as opportunities as things that can help the project, such as if you're trying to buy parts and labor, maybe there's a discount during a certain part of the year. And then we get into scope, cost, schedule, the triad of project management. Scope are the things that we're doing. It is defined, and what we're really trying to implement is preventing scope creep. If we define what we're doing early on, then if that list is properly maintained, then it shouldn't be added to or taken away from without the proper authorization. When we think of cost, this is our budget. Throughout the project, this is how much money we plan to spend and no more. And we might have a little bit of extra funds for additional reasons or unforeseen circumstances. But the cost is a set fixed amount of how much we plan to spend for the project. Then we have schedule, how long it's going to take. We we plan a time period where we are trying to not go outside of it. And then from there, we have our resource management and our procurement management. When we think of resource management and procurement, it sounds similar to cost management, but here's where they're different. Cost management is the budget that you plan to use throughout the project. And then resource management is the human and non-human resources that you've actually acquired. And procurement management is how you go about acquiring those resources. So for example, if you have your cost, your budget, you then say, well, for some things, they might have to be acquired at certain time periods. They might have to be acquired through certain regulations. You might not be able to buy a certain amount of product in excess, or you might have to buy certain items in bulk based on, the seller's requirements. That's procurement. Now, when you have resources, how are we going to efficiently utilize these resources? How are we going to properly not waste the time of the resources that we have acquired? And then we get into communications and stakeholder management. Now, these two sound similar as well, but the key difference is communication management is understanding the flow of information and controlling how that flow is going to happen. For example, phone calls, emails, text messages, ad advertisements. All of these things are how we communicate with our stakeholders. However, stakeholder management is different, whereas you are identifying and analyzing those stakeholders and understanding their needs. So if communication management were to be seen as controlling the stream of information like a river, stakeholder management would be understanding and knowing the animals and humans that go to the river to drink from it. And then we get into quality management. Quality management is based off of defined metrics, and this is very similar to what we're talking about in monitoring and controlling. If you have a car and you want that car to be defined as fast, how do you define it as fast? What are the measurements? What are the metrics? Is it 0 to 60 in a number of seconds? Or is it being able to go to 180 miles per hour in a certain amount of time? This is important because when you define your metrics of quality, you're not subjective in your behavior, you're objective in it. And when you're objective in it, then you're able to clearly describe to both the customer and to the organization that is acquiring this how this is a quality product. And so when we have our 5 process groups and our 10 knowledge areas, these combined together is the general workflow of understanding a project. However, there are 2 main schools of thought. There is predictive project management, which is considered a waterfall, and then there is agile project management, which is considered a cyclic cycle. And so in predictive, you have sequential planning, you have early on planning, you have, for an example, construction planning, things that are large, well-known early ahead of time, and a lot of changes are just not really recommended for it. But when you think of agile, you get into product cycles of iterations and redevelopment. You think of software development. You think of the plan likely to develop over time. And they're both needed for different scenarios. And this is where we think of the basics of project management. Our 5 process groups, our 10 knowledge areas, in the 2 larger schools of thought, predictive versus agile planning. This is just to cover the basics. My name is Robert King. Thank you.